Good to go? Okay. We'll call to order the special meeting workshop of the Board of Directors of Fort Ord Reuse Authority, Monday, March 7th at 4:30. If you'll please stand for Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will have let me jump to number 4 and then go back to 3 because maybe some more people will come in. Do we have any acknowledgements or announcements or correspondence?
No, sir.
Oh, that wasn't helpful. That didn't work. Okay, could I have a roll call, please?
City of Carmel by the Sea, Councilmember Beach. City of Delray Oaks, Mayor Edelin. Here. City of Marina, Mayor Pro Tem O'Connell.
Here.
City of Marina, Councilmember Morton. Yes. City of Monterey, Vice Mayor Haffa. Absent. Monterey County Supervisor Potter. Here. Monterey County Supervisor Phillips. Here. Monterey County Supervisor Parker. Here. City of Pacific Grove Councilmember Lucius. No. Absent. City of Salinas Mayor Gunter. Absent. City of San City Mayor Pendergrass. Absent. And City of Seaside Mayor Rubio.
Here.
Present. Mayor Pro Tem Oglesby. Chair O'Connell, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. This will be the public comment period. Any member of the public wishing to address the board on matters within its jurisdiction but not on this agenda, you may do so. You have up to 3 minutes. Is there any member of the public desiring to do so? I guess we're using this mic over here?
Yes.
Seeing none, we'll close public comment. We'll go to the business item. 6A, Regional Urban Design Guidelines Status Update. Very quickly, this special meeting workshop is intended to bring the board and the community up to date on the current draft of the Regional Urban Design Guideline content and new interactive website organizing and structure and use. In addition, the staff will highlight the policy language refinements developed since the last workshop and summarize remaining steps in development of the final Regional Urban Design Guideline policy for board adoption. Thank you. Mr. Hulmar?
Thank you, Chair O'Connell and members of the board. If you will follow with me, we're going to do a PowerPoint presentation to bring you up to speed on where we are at the Regional Urban Design Guidelines Task Force and staff level. Today, we're asking simply that you receive this status report, which is intended to give you an update on all of the details that we've been working on since the end of December. And as you remember, last fall, we also provided the board with an update on where we were with this design guidelines effort. Also, at the end of the meeting, we'd like to get some direction from the board on a schedule for considering adoption based on where we believe we are, which is fairly close to a point where the board could adopt these guidelines and use them as a guidance for upcoming projects. Next slide, please. This timeline is a bit of a crucial one, and while I believe everyone can see it from a distance, I apologize for the small writing to the right. The first thing about this has to do with the FORA creation, the Reuse Authority Act. The state law specifically gives the Fort Ord Reuse Authority powers that have to do with design and implementation of a recovery program for the former Fort Ord. In fact, for the 2 or 3 years of its first years of existence, the Fort Ord Reuse Authority spent a great deal of time considering these design questions, considering the use questions that have to do with the recovery program. In the base reuse plan, it was adopted in 1997. Specifically, design principle number 6 called for regional urban design guidelines, which was intended to be implemented on a base-wide basis, but in the latter part of the last century, the board looked at some policy questions with respect to Fort Ord Reuse Authority, creating a base-wide redevelopment agency and undertaking some of these design and implementation functions as a single agency, but the board's policy was that this should be done as a multiple agency effort, and individual jurisdictions of Delray Oaks, Monterey, Seaside, the county, and Marina would all undertake pieces of that effort independently. In fact, the vote was 7-6 against a base-wide redevelopment, but in favor of individual jurisdiction implementation. That was important because there were triggering events that talked about how pieces of the base reuse plan, including the policies, would be implemented. And so a few years later, Congressman FARA joined in the discussion and said, we can't wait for the jurisdictions to go with Highway 1. We need to have a scenic corridor, and talked about the Highway 1 design guidelines component of the base reuse plan being implemented. And so separate from the other regional urban design guidelines, the board took that piece out and undertook the process of a set of Highway 1 design guidelines, which were adopted by the board and have been the practice that we've generally used for doing consistency determinations along the Highway 1 corridor. In a few years later, actually 7 to be precise, in 2012, the board undertook a base reuse plan reassessment. And in that process, it was resoundingly noticed by board members and the consultants that the regional urban design guidelines that were set forth to be the guiding light for how centers, gateways, and other factors of design importance, including corridors, would be developed, were still wanting, and that the triggering events for major projects had not created these regional urban design guidelines. So, as part of the Fort Ord colloquium that happened shortly after the reassessment process, the idea of getting these guidelines done before FORA expired, which is June 30, 2020, was crucial. So the board set up a work plan in 2014, specifically tasking staff with putting together a program that would hire top-level consultants, go through the process of implementing those components of design principle number 6, and finish the regional urban design guidelines. And including that, at the time, Chair Edelin appointed the Fort Ord Regional Urban Design Guidelines Task Force, which had the representatives of the major stakeholders in the design of Fort Ord, represented by their city managers. And at that point, Chair Edelin also asked Victoria Beach if she would serve as a liaison with the board and be a member of that task force based on her both skill and her representation, City of Carmel, as an interested entity in the design. So we went through the process, undertook a competitive request for proposals. We have selected Dover Cole. They're a firm out of Florida, had excellent background, excellent recommendations, and had done design guidelines for other communities. To undertake this process, part of their proposal was to use a charrette format, bring the community together and engage them on a regular basis at the jurisdiction level, at the citizen level, and at the board level to bring forward as many ideas as were possible and to follow on the basic principles of compact growth, compact redevelopment, compact reuse of the former Fort Ord. Included in that process was the design charrette that was in early 2015, and the results from that became a part of what staff working with Dover Cole put together to bring to you the essential elements of what became the design guidelines last year. So what's happened? At the end of last year, we got a nice, wonderful package from our consultants. We got a lot of appendices that had to do with a lot of nice drawings. We had a great overall package, but it yet was not clear, based on the comments we got from board and others, that it was clearly guidelines that could be used in an interactive or even a direct way by jurisdictions who wanted to apply those for making consistency determinations. So staff has taken the effort to completely rewrite sections of this to reflect the work that was provided by the board members and the input, And we have refined the areas that look at an overview, the overview in particular on page 3 of 57, talk about what these design principles and why they were included, talk about why they were prepared, how they apply, and then I would also draw your attention to page 11. That was a specific reference on page 11 that talks about the policy application of the base reuse plan design directive and how the regional urban design guidelines implement those. Those were crucial to comments by the City of Seaside, the City of Delray Oaks, and the County of Monterey. So if you look on page 11, there's some real clear definition about how these design guidelines apply. We've also added a detailed definitions section that's also quite valuable. And so what we will be asking you for later is a little input after Josh goes through this and gives you an idea. And as he goes through this, I want it understood that at the staff level and at the task force level, particularly Council Member Beach, we're talking about at least 1,000 hours of extra work that people have put in making sure these design guidelines are of the quality that we will and all be proud of as we go forward with the recovery at former Fort Ord. Josh?
Thank you, Michael, and board members for taking your time on a Monday evening to come hear about this project. It has indeed been a journey and wouldn't have really been possible without a significant amount of public engagement throughout the process. So I think where we are now reflects a lot of that, and hopefully the presentation here will just help you get a handle on what the structure and the content, the important pieces are, and how we've been working to bring them to a place where they can really help us in the development and reuse process. So what you have in front of you is a printout that really is a composite of all the most relevant policy language. As Michael mentioned, we've received a final draft submission from our consultant team at the end of the year, and we have been working to refine that to this policy language and then also make best use of the associated content in the form of integrating it into a website that we've developed, which expands on the content in this policy document that you have printed out, but is includes all of this language specifically. So that language is intended to be identical, and once a policy is approved, we would house a time-stamped policy document on our website as well. So why did we create a website? And that was really in recognition of simply that the digital files that we received were representing a bottleneck in our workflow. We only had a certain number of folks on staff who could actually interact with this software in an efficient way. And by producing a website, we could make it not only available for our team, but also then use that for the community, increasing accessibility to the policy. So we thought that would be a smart move, and we spoke internally and then with the task force to go about ensuring that we had support for that move. So we've put this website up here. It's at a temporary domain called ordforward.org, and we may well find another domain that's more appropriate, specific to this policy. But what it does is it organizes the information in a format that's kind of identical to your table of contents. If you just turn to that page in your paper, you can follow along that way, or you can simply follow along to what I'll walk us through here. But basically, we have 4 main areas. The introduction, which includes a timeline, references to the design principles drawn directly from the reuse plan, the executive summary of Dina Belzer's work in the economic factors, the policy application page that Michael referenced, and then the important definitions page. And indeed, this is a draft, and some of the comments that we've already received from our actively engaged members of the public have helped us strengthen those definitions. We are looking for that kind of feedback. If we've missed keywords or there's clarity needed on those definitions, that would be a great way to contribute to this getting further down the road. The next section is the guidelines themselves, and as you can see here, they're organized in these categories based on roads, building, landscaping, signage, and other matters of visual importance. And that really, organization comes directly from a sentence that those of you who've been around from the beginning will be most familiar with. It's this one from page 61. And it's really come down to be the most concise policy direction onto what we were to create. So we've used that as the frame for these guidelines, and that emerged during our design process with the consultants, and we've carried that forward here. Within each of these categories, then, the specific guidelines are organized. So within roads, we talk about complete streets, connectivity, trails, and then we work to integrate the Highway 1 design corridor as a part of that category of information. Here under buildings, we're talking about building orientation, types, setbacks, and heights. Under landscaping, we're talking about landscape palettes and lighting. Signage, we have gateway signage and wayfinding signage. And then the broad category of other matters of visual importance, which is specifically referenced in that sentence, we include public spaces, centers, and transit facilities. So I'll go into a little more detail on these. Following from that is this question of, which really was one of the first questions we addressed, is where do these guidelines apply? So that's what we categorize under our locations tab. And so that's the same thing in your table of contents. It would also be structured that way. So we do provide an overview of the land use jurisdictions, as well as individual town and village centers, gateways, regional circulation corridors, trails, and regional transit facilities. Now, for both of these categories of information, the guidelines and the locations, through the process that we've gone through in refining, we've come up with kind of key standardizations for each of those bits of information that I'll go into, but we feel that it helps everyone set expectations about what kind of information to look for and how that will be used in policy implementation. On the website, we also include this area called appendices. And so this is where we've retained information about the public process that we went through. There was a fair amount of survey type information that was obtained during the workshops. For those of you who are here, we did opinion polling, and we did processes where different maps were reviewed and marked up by the community, and it really worked to I think, bring out a lot of people's concerns and preferences and issues that they would like to see addressed. We also have vision and illustrations. You'll find on the website this part is relatively hollow at the moment because we have been prioritizing getting information into the site. This is actually the part where, for those of you who were around during the charrette, we saw a number of the watercolor graphics that our consultant team put together, including ones like the one that'll come up here in a moment when this works. This one here, these types of graphics, which while being inspirational, were difficult to translate into specific actionable policy language. So we don't want to lose those, but we're going to house them in an area described as appendices, which again will be sort of a reference material and not considered part of the board adopted policy. We also include the market update. So this is the Dina Belzer summary plus the complete report that she submitted for review. So it's broken out into these three categories of the reuse plan, build out, the housing market, and commercial real estate. So the website's set up to be very accessible. The same navigation is accessible from the top, from the main page on these sliders, through these buttons here on the main body, and then at the bottom there's a footer that's present on all the pages that links, quick links to the location pages as well as other relevant material. So I think perhaps the best way to go would be to simply step through an introduction of these components, and then if there's any questions that emerge, please, feel free to just raise your hand. The project timeline, Michael pretty much covered all of that. One thing that's nice about the web, of course, is that you can link other material. So here if someone had a question about any of our task force meetings, you can link to the FORA website where you can get all the minutes, all the agendas, all the drafts that have previously been submitted, and all of that kind of stuff. We have here links to the individual events, and this is like some pictures and summaries from the keypad polling. We've got the contract from our consultants. If anybody wants to look at that, we've got a video of when we interviewed them here. We've got our request for proposals. So really kind of deep body of information. This is kind of intended to be a hub for now and in the future if people want to get into all of this stuff. Design principles. Now this is language directly out of the reuse plan, early on in the reuse plan, with a community design vision, lays out these 6 principles, and these are expandable for the full quote. What we really found in doing this more in-depth review, and really emerged throughout this process, is the reuse plan has a significant amount of design-related material already in there. And so rather than recreate it and have that be something that you all had to wrestle with, we simply thought it would be best to just paste it in as it is. And in this one in particular is the design principle 6, which is the one referencing the creation of the guidelines. On the sidebar here, you'll see that this image here is also one that we've shown before. It's on page 61, which basically is the most clear representation of the where these guidelines were to apply. And so this became we were really parsing very thin pencil lines on a small graphic in many cases to say, well, the reuse plan envisioned town and village centers growing up around the university. And so that is really the basis for where we landed on which locations are where these guidelines would be required versus recommended, things like that. Again, this is the Dina Belzer economics factor and the definitions and so on. Perhaps, let's see, so I'll jump into one of the guidelines as an example. Complete streets is a concept where you design streets for all modes of transportation. So you're considering pedestrians, cyclists, vehicle traffic, and so on. And this is a policy that the Transportation Agency of Monterey County has promoted widely and continues to promote. And it's really become pretty much a standard around the country. So we've simply worked to integrate that into our policy, and drawing on the reuse plan. What you'll see on these individual guideline pages is some of the standard formatting I'll point out. The one is the objectives. So the objectives is sort of the 10,000-foot view of that individual guideline, and it mostly draws, again, direct quotes from the reuse plan. We wanted to frame what the reuse plan direction was. So, for example, here it talks about encouraging a development pattern which mixes uses horizontally and vertically for an active streetscape. scale and pattern of development which is appropriate to a village environment and friendly to pedestrians and cyclists. These kinds of goal-type statements. And then the second component of each guideline will be what we term measures. And so this gets to a much more granular level where individual legislative land use decisions like general plans, zoning codes, or specific plans, or project entitlements could use these measures as a way to self-evaluate their project to see whether it would comply with that individual guideline. And so we are working at the staff level to produce a checklist that would be available for staff members and for developers and the community to use for that purpose. And so each one of these has a series of pretty substantial list of measures. Now, we do, in thinking this through, the way we've laid it out currently is that the measures would really be pertinent mostly to the staff work. That is, we would get into the granular discussions with the proponents and the jurisdiction staff on the evaluation of these measures, similar to what we do now for other consistency determination criteria. And then we would use those as a basis for a staff recommendation with all the other factors that are considered in a consistency determination. Now you as board members would be able to evaluate the objectives and the measures together if you so choose. But really it leaves some room for creativity and innovation. That is to say, if a particular jurisdiction or developer felt like they could meet these objectives by other means that are listed here, those could be offered up in a sort of a notes kind of format. Here is, we're not addressing this in this way, we're addressing it in this way. And so in that sense, it would encourage, not stifle, innovation. We can get more into that as I get further through this. Just let me lay out this format a little further. Within each page, we have links to what we're calling relevant locations. So where the complete streets guideline would apply is town and village centers, regional circulation corridors, or would have some potential application is the point. Not expressly always required there, but if you were developing any of these in any of these areas, you'd want to take this complete streets policy into consideration. So we provide links to those maps, as well as design references to sample street sections and our existing roadway design standards. Now, as you'll come to know further along here, connecting these two references is one of our remaining tasks. We found that is an area that needs further refinement before we're ready for prime time. But that's another story. So let me just jump to the locations next. And what we have done, we wrestled a lot with the maps from the early stages of this process. We found that in more than one case, we were left wanting with the maps that we were working with. And so what we've done here is developed an interactive maps on the website so that we can provide an overview, and then depending on what someone's interest is, they can pan and zoom to a particular location. They can use these little icons to bring up legend, and it looks a little funny on here just because the screen dimensions are a little more narrow, but suffice to say, it's a lot more interactive and accessible than the prior maps, we can say that. One thing I will point out is, as you'll see here with town and village centers, we have two categories of symbology. One is a center, and the other is an opportunity. And so we've tried to standardize that same symbology throughout each one of the categories. So for the gateways, for example, you'll see that the one called gateway is a dark symbol, and the one called an opportunity is a hollow symbol. Same for regional corridors. We've said these are the regional corridors, and this would be an opportunity. And so the big difference there is the ones that have the dark coloration are the ones that are required, where the urban design guidelines are expressly identified as being applicable through mostly that original page 61 map that I showed you. And the opportunities are where the guidelines are encouraged but not required. So that's simply reflecting input that was received through the task force process, through the public meetings that we've had, and through the feedback that we've received from you all. You can also go to these maps, and you can turn different layers on and off as a user, so you can zoom right into a particular set that you might be interested in. There are different base maps, so you can turn on, let's say, one with imagery if you wanted to look at a particular area. Let me see if I could make that a little more visible for us. But you can see that it becomes a bit more accessible for people. If you can figure out how to work with it, that is, of course. But I'm pretty used to it by now, but you can call me anytime you need help. So this would just allow us to go in on particular areas and understand that for this particular intersection, any future legislative land use decision or project entitlements would be required to have the urban design guidelines as a consistency determination criteria. So within this website, then, we've created sort of theme-specific pages. Now here's the part where I click on this thing, and hopefully it loads fast enough for us. I was having some loading issues on the Wi-Fi earlier for these maps. But, see, now there's a good one. So here's a view of the centers that were that sort of emerged out of the design process. Those the opportunities where the guidelines are recommended but not required, and those dark ones are the ones that are where they are clearly within the original reuse plan intent. And that same symbology is carried through the remaining subject areas. Now, in addition, there's a next level that we're developing still, which would have to do with a particular project area. So this is a center at 2nd Avenue and Imgen Parkway. So while this loads, so we have it set up here where you can see that this circle, by the way, is a 1/4 mile radius around the center. And that's something that relates to walk distance. People will generally walk up to a 1/4 mile before choosing some other mode of transit. So that's kind of what is used to relate to centers and walkable centers. So this has that walk distance, and it also shows some of the project boundaries that are currently there. And so we're working to develop this for all of the centers that'll be on this website. As well, it provides links to the jurisdiction websites, the legislative land use decision of reference here, and then other relevant documents. So this would kind of be a source for very specific information about that location. That's one of the benefits of using the web, of course, is we can link all this information. So I think that's the overview of those important parts. And let me just go back to this PowerPoint to see if there's anything that I overlooked. We've kind of talked about our refinements of content, really strengthening the connections with the reuse plan. We did undertake a pretty substantial staff effort to review specific plans for you know, the main gate, the dunes here and out at East Garrison, for detailed design guidelines to really determine, did we overshoot, did we miss anything, is there areas where what we're recommending would conflict? And the good news is really no cases emerged during that review where we had, you know, head-to-head problems with what was being recommended there. In fact, they were all quite similar in many ways. There was a lot of similarity, and we were able to find components from each of those that we were able to integrate into ours. So there's really, you know, doing what we set out to do of integrating with local plans. And then really focusing on clarity. We really wanted the language to be direct and clear. We've identified some gaps in the content that still need to be filled in, as I mentioned earlier. Our landscaping palettes, our signage, and our road cross sections are the biggest ones, and we feel that by continuing the effort that we have with some targeted use of our consultants, we can get this work done in short order. This sort of goes into what I described about the objectives and the measures. Again, this is kind of a key policy part because we're defining, you know, the general design direction that derives from the reuse plan, and then we're kind of laying out specific measures that developers and the community can use to get a sense of if their goals will be met, and our goals will be met. This kind of just talks about the locations and opportunities, and that's kind of the big breakdown within that category of information. And we've kind of laid this out just to confuse you a little further if you can follow that, but it's a flow chart that simply lays out how somebody might go through using this information to complete consistency determination documents, including our checklist, bring that then through the local jurisdictions, they bring that to the FORA staff, we complete our review, make recommendations here to you all, and then you're free to make your policy decisions at that point. And at the bottom we say, you know, if someone who's a developer or a jurisdiction wants the highest approval confidence, they would comply with all the measures that are relevant. If they're more interested in innovation or variation from what is put forth in the policy, that they have the capacity to make the case that the objectives are still being achieved. So, you know, we can dive into any of the language you all want to do at this point. I think this is kind of a workshop format, but, you know, since we've been getting continuous feedback all throughout the process, we're proposing a 15-day open public comment period within which, the end of which time we would sort of kind of close that down and bring forth a draft for you, hopefully. Michael loves to think about it coming in April. I still am a little bit more, conservative on that. It might be a special meeting in April or another date that you all choose. But we do have a few pieces to fill in. And then, we're working on, we're already thinking about training and education and outreach, working with the jurisdictions, developers, and public, doing things like workshops, presentations at planning commission board meetings, things like that. I think with this website, we'll be able to be pretty interactive with the staff. I think it really provides us a powerful tool for doing that work. And, we've even gone so far as to draft up a little flyer that we would see going out to each of the planning desks that people could be made aware of this policy and things like that. So we're really working hard to get this to completion and look forward to any comments that you all have. Thank you.
Is there any board member have any questions for Josh or Michael relating to this? Wow.
Chair, I'd just like to add a couple of comments. I think it's important to note that, and Josh pointed out the April 8th schedule or some other time in April or something like that to get this done. There have been over 30 public meetings where the regional urban design guidelines have been discussed. We've had an extraordinary amount of interactive participation at the task force meetings. Consistently, we get directed input from staff members from Marina and commissioners, planning commissioners from Marina have regularly attended the task force meetings. They at least get 2, sometimes 3 Marina planning commissions. The city of Seaside has had extraordinary staff support and background from both engineering and planning and the new city manager and the old city manager have all actively participated. MPC is at each event. UCSC, California State University, Monterey Bay, has interactively connected our work on regional urban design guidelines, taken things from this process, used it as part of their planning process for the campus as well. County Resources Agency and other executives in the county have provided on a regular basis input to this process. And Carl Holm, I can't thank him enough. I think he sat at our office for hours, not as long as Councilmember Beach, but hours and hours and hours over several days, working through each and every line of this to make sure it fit in with what our best expectations would be. So there's been no shortage of input. This is not a rush to judgment. It's been very process-oriented and very much a part of a way of engaging the community in the process. Now, once or twice we've had folks that have had concerns or complained. We've met with them individually. The consultants individually met with everyone from the Fort Ord Environmental Justice Network. We then again met with them. Then Josh met again with them. We've had individual city council meetings. We have meetings in those communities to talk about this process and gain the input. So there's no shortage of engagement in this process, and including the other trails process that's been moving along the line with this has also been an active engagement in this process and directly reflected in the document you see here today. So it's all been there.
Thank you. We'll go out to, oh, you, okay, there was a question. Yes, go ahead, please.
So on page 11, this, which you pointed out to us earlier, can you just explain the difference between a legislative land use? I see existing legislative land use identified, amendment to a legislative land use. What clearly is omitted is a new legislative land use, which may never occur. I don't know the distinction, compared to a project level development entitlement. I just need those explained more clearly, because it appears like a whole body's omitted.
If you look in paragraph 3 of the policy application, the FORA board has the responsibility to review and certify underlying jurisdictions' legislative land use documents. All of those have to come forward. So when you're amending an existing one that's already been adopted for consistency, it has to come back because that's a legislative land use amendment or adjustment. So for that component of it, it would be subject to these regional urban design guidelines. For a brand new one, such as...
But the new one is omitted, that's my point. We're missing, we only have covered in item 1, existing, and number 2, an amendment, but doesn't say new, it's missing. That's why I'm so confused.
We'll just add that. How about that?
Well, that would be important, thank you.
No.
Well, I don't disagree with any of that, but I don't think staff should just say we'll add it. I mean, I thought you just said we looked at this document very closely, so why don't we just take suggestions and continue to look at it closely and see what that means for the rest of us?
Fair enough. Sorry, my apologies.
Any other questions from any board members? Okay, seeing none, we'll go out to the public. Any member of the public have any questions or comments relating to this? Yes.
My name is Mimi Velasquez. I'm here on behalf of Levon Stone for the FORA Environmental Justice Network. In reference to actually one of the comments just made regarding addressing some of the complaints or issues brought up by the FORA Environmental Justice Network, we did indeed have meetings with the entities that he mentioned, but there's a big difference between having a meeting and getting input and then actually implementing that input. And that has yet to be done. Since the beginning of this whole process, over 20 years ago, the one thing that has been ignored is Executive Order SB 12898, which was supposed to protect those that were most impacted by the closure of this base in regards to the rebuilding of this base. And a simple review of the website board forward and looking at the comments from the community members that have made comments on the website shows you that the disadvantaged community is not being represented. A simple survey of the people visiting the website would tell you that these are going to be people in upper income classes that are actually going to the website and making suggestions. So the full community is still not being, I guess, addressed in this process. And the lower income community is actually a majority of Monterey County. So again, in regards to the things that were brought up, one of the things which, after recently meeting with the welfare and unemployment officials, is that there are tons of construction workers currently in Monterey County that have been unemployed for not just years, but 10 years plus. And yet all of these developers coming in still do not have to hire them. So you have fully qualified forklift operators, et cetera, that are working at Home Depot and then maybe having to work at Walmart just to support their families. When you have these developers coming in, bringing in employees from Fremont and Richmond and places way north from here. So again, the local public is still not being addressed. I don't know how you guys are going to do it. You might have to do with other communities with high population, low-income people. The officials might have to actually, instead of putting on their dress shoes in the morning, they might have to put on some comfortable walking shoes and actually go out into the community and speak to the community, because these members of the community that, for whatever reason, can't seem to show up here, there might be a reason for that. They might be working more than one job or might not be able to find a babysitter, but they still have a right to be represented in this new buildup of the former Fort Ord. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member of the public? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Michael or Josh, appears to be a concern relating to the disadvantaged community members not having a say or their opinions being considered in this. Would you like to respond to that, if possible?
Well, I would say that, you know, we have throughout this process tried to engage the broadest set of the community possible. That was the reason we had evening off-site design charrettes, for example, during that period. All our meetings are public and noticed regularly through all of our standard channels, and we have not only provided the website but print versions of the same content in our packet materials, and we have gone to meet with Ms. Stone and her staff on a number of occasions. We have met with them here in our offices, and you know, frankly, I would meet with them and continue to meet with them if we could figure out a way that we could integrate. I'm just not sure that this particular policy is.
I would add, Josh, that in this process we have taken rather active notes about all of the inputs that we've received from the citizens from Marina, the citizens from Seaside and Delray Oaks who've come to the meetings. Individuals have reflected what their background and so forth has been during these meetings. We've been careful to make sure that the comments that we've received are included in the appendices, but they're also specifically highlighted in the economic report from Dina Belzer, where members of this board and members of the community specifically said those economic factors are important, and how the design guidelines create a community that's welcoming to all income groups. And we believe that's exactly how they're reflected here. So I would add those comments to what you're saying.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I would ask, what exactly are you requesting of this board at this time? Are we looking at just setting a date in the future to bring this draft back, or someone clarify for me what you're looking for?
I just have a question. Could I
Oh, you do have a
Sorry.
question?
I have a question. So Josh, under definitions,
Yeah.
this is supposed to be sort of a listing of terminology that's used throughout the guidelines? Is
Yes.
that right? I'd suggest that maybe they're a little thin as far as some of the terms that are used elsewhere. Arterials, bends, stubs, dead ends, scale, mass, view shed, greenways, context. There's a lot of architectural verbiage that's in here that
Yes.
isn't defined in the definitions area. So I think that should be broadened to be more inclusive.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's a pretty shallow list.
Yeah, what is a stub, anyway? No idea.
Well, that's a good, it appears to be a road that stubs into some area, but, yeah. No.
From
And
what,
arterial for the general public would be a tough one. It's arterial, urban arterial, or several.
It's very helpful,
Yeah,
Dave,
so
very helpful.
that's a suggestion.
thank you. Going back,
I had one, Josh, can you explain to me a little bit more how the measures are going to work and how flexible or inflexible the measures are?
Well, we are kind of, we've been working on a checklist for quite some time that has really been put aside till we've worked out the language, and now we're bringing that back into focus. But the basic idea is that the measures will have a checklist. It'll say configuration, and it'll say addresses or complies with the measure or not, yes, no, and then an area for comments. So if somebody says no, they would then fill in the comment area, and then that would be the indication that there's a topic for discussion with the planning staff. And that then would, there are kind of numeric approaches where one might be inclined to say, well, you meet 7 of 10 of these measures, then you're by default compliant. That assumes that each of the measures are of equal importance, which gets a little tricky. So I think that is sort of the distance between where we are and where we need to be to have a fully implementable policy. And I think it's still yet to be, each case will probably be some work for John Giffen and his folks, in terms of that stuff. But we'll do our best case to bring a checklist that will address all of those as best we can, and then I think it'll be up to people that, focus on the law to evaluate how closely they can be followed.
Board Member Parker?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to comment that, we've seen a few iterations of these design guidelines, and I opened this version with a fair amount of trepidation, ready to be swamped by a lot of information that I wouldn't quite know how to use. And I just want to say thank you to the people who have been working to make this a document that has context, it makes sense, it's very user-friendly compared to the other, which I never could quite find my way in or figure out how I was supposed to use it. This, I'm not a planner, so we don't want to turn me loose with using it, but it's very logical from a regular person's perspective to figure out, and hopefully it'll be useful for the professionals as well. But I just appreciate all of the work that's gone into making this something that is approachable, you can find your way around. If you want more information, you can get lost in a sea of detail. Anyway, I just really appreciate, this is actually something that is user-friendly. And I think it's really critical because, you know, this is some of the practical advice about how we're going to implement the base reuse plan and really be able to take advantage of the vision for the economic vitality and the way these neighborhoods can grow up around the jobs and be connected to the trails and be be walkable and, magnetic and be that high revenue generating engine for the jurisdictions. Anyway, just, I wasn't sure how it was all going to work before, but seeing the way this evolution of the design guidelines is going, I really have confidence that it really is going to help us take the steps we need to take to have those communities and neighborhoods grow up in the way that will be of maximum benefit economically, and also being able to attract and retain the workforce that we want, and because it is a more concentrated building, a development footprint, it also maximizes the open space as well. So it's really, it's just a great expression of kind of the vision that was out there, but I think it's been hard for us to envision how in the world do you actually make that happen, and this is getting us, I think, a lot closer, so thank you.
Board Member Beach and then Board Member Edelin.
Hi, I wanted to say this earlier, just because I've been so involved in this. It's not a question, because I think I know my way around this document more than I thought I ever would. But I wanted to point out, just to add on to what Michael was saying earlier, he was talking about the process of the RUDGE committee and how many different diverse people were involved. The one group you left out were the developers. My impression of that task force is so positive. I think that it started out really with the appearance of conflict. I don't know if that was real conflict or not, but certainly we thought there was conflict. And now I feel like the more we've worked together, the more it has turned into a real collaboration. The enthusiasm about this particular formatting is very, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but it feels very palpable to me in the room when you think about the usability. So we've vetted the usability with both the folks that Michael mentioned and, of course, the developers, who seem to be so relieved that this is now a document that you can use at a basic level, at a simple level with plain English, except for stubs, which we'll work on. And then that leads me to one other comment, which is that the staff effort here is just, I'm floored by it. It is absolutely something I've never seen. I haven't been in public service that long in Monterey County, but I've never seen such devotion to taking over a task and making it useful to the community here. The fact that we're now on the web is so helpful. First of all, for the reasons Josh said, it enables us to sort of get in and have a direct interface where we can express our community desires in real time onto the web until it's finalized and time-stamped. And then I just also wanted to clarify for people, if they don't realize this, this is probably a work in progress. Josh, I don't want to slam it or anything, but this is really the old school, old economy version of the web. So this is only meant, just so you know, this is the web will be the real reference point. This will be all the content printed out if you must deal with print. But the idea is that the web one is the dominant tool going forward. It will be static in the sense that it'll be time-stamped. It will have the same amendment process that a print document would have. Maybe 6 months later, someone figures out that there was a mistake or a typo and there'd be an amendment with a timestamp. So it's meant to act as a print, but in a more dynamic and user-friendly way. And the only other thing I wanted to say is that, because this goes to Frank's question of what we're looking for input, what the staff is looking for. One of the major benefits of making the transition from the print formatted work that we got from the Florida consultant to this dynamic web version is that it requires logic to put it in the web. The web has a kind of organizational demand. It places a demand on the person designing. Like, I have to link from here to here. What does that make sense? And it's just harder to make a mess of it in a way. I mean, I guess you could make a mess of anything, but it just required a certain type of discipline that then enabled, I think, the RUDGE and the staff and me to see where there were content gaps or where there was too much content. So content that was redundant, content that was not adding to what was already said, and then see, okay, here's where we have too much content, here's where we can streamline it and make it pithier, and here's where we actually have a whole. So I think, again, I don't know if folks have looked at this as closely as the rest of us, but that, I think, is what's next, is the determinate, and Josh had a few things on there that had to do with landscaping, the cross sections of the streets, which are here, they're very much not yet in a place where they are useful, in my view. They're just there. And so that coming together of that content is what was revealed by this organizational exercise. So I don't know if folks have other content that they've like stubs. I think noticing that the definitions are not done is helpful. I mean, we should have a pass. I don't know if you guys had that planned, but.
I mean, we recognize that the definitions are,
They're
that's
work in
why I
progress.
mentioned them earlier. By people reading the document and actually saying, it would be helpful to have a reference for this particular word. I mean, that's useful for us. So we have refined an original set of definitions to a much smaller set, and then we expect to fill that in with the kind of feedback that we've gotten here tonight, and other people would, if you could, or your staff could, read this document and send us any comments related to that. Definitions would be great, or the policy application. Those are the areas that we need the most focus.
And again, I think Josh pointed out, this is diagram that I don't think you saw yet. It's on the forward document, but this document of the existing engineered cross sections of the street. This is just one example so you understand the scope of what is yet to be done. There's these engineered base reuse plan minimums, minimum engineering standards for the roadways. And then we have suggested roadways from our consultant. Those have not yet been cross-referenced so that we understand which engineered cross-section or which recommended cross-section or sections, plural, could be used with which engineered. This is just a content, gap. And it's, that's the sort of thing, I think, the level of the scale of which, at which we just have to fix these remaining holes. But I don't think, again, I think if anyone notices anything else, these are the ones we've recognized on the task force.
Thank you. Board Member Edelman, then Board Member Rubio.
Yeah, I'd just like to quickly say this is an outstanding document. It's taken well over 3 years. During that time, there's a heck of a lot of work done. And during that time, Supervisor Parker and I were on the opposite ends of many, many discussions and disagreements.
Really?
Yes, and I'd just like to say that I think we both agree that the end product now is taken in both, not extremes, but both points of view, and we've got an outstanding product right there. I think the Regional Urban Design Guidelines Task Force, especially Victoria Beach, with her massive amount of work, not only that with the PRAC, the work she's done there, along with the FORA staff, deserves a lot of credit for producing this outstanding work, and it'll serve us well into the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's been a lot of work, and, when we talk about the definitions, they are incomplete, but I think maybe a way to handle that is through the different sections. Complete streets needs certain definitions. You can have a glossary for that because it doesn't really apply to any of the other sections. So each section could have its own additional glossary for specific terms generic to that. Well, to that section. But in terms of how we got to here, it wasn't a nice rosy path. When we had the first charrettes, it wasn't all that inclusionary. It wasn't that well broadcast, well, maybe it was well broadcast, but there was only one segment of the community coming out. And that's when I asked Michael to go out to Seaside. And when they mentioned when they were going to do that, it was during the middle of the day. So, no, you can't do that because there's people that got to work and they're not going to be there. You have to tailor it to the community you want to reach. And staff went out and did that. And I think we got a richer content because of that. And I think that the developers came around once we started getting a little more flexible with the language. When we were saying shall, there was a lot of pushback because it was creating situations where there was no flexibility. And as we became more flexible and as you say, there may be a part where, it doesn't meet the standard, but you go talk to someone and say, oh, well, there's some constraints on that particular road that this is the only thing that'll work there. Well, then it makes sense. But once you take the word shall out, then you can have those kinds of discussions, and it makes it a little bit easier for people to come to the table. And that's how I think we got to this point, is that discussion, that back and forth, give and take. And I know the city of Seaside has worked very closely in this process with a lot of comments, and we continue to have comments. And I know my staff got this late last week, so they're probably over there furiously making more comments. So I'm sure that you'll get some more, but I don't think there'll be anything major. There'll be some edits that will be coming forth from the city of Seaside.
Right.
So I'm looking forward to how that gets incorporated and what our final product is. When we say final draft, and we get to move this forward. And I don't know if it's April, May, or whenever, but just as long as it's a complete document that everybody can live with. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Potter, before we lose a quorum, can you put together a motion? Can we have a friendly amendment relating to a date certain to bring this back? And I'd also suggest that the motion include consideration of Board Member Morton and your comments relating, and Mayor Rubio's comments relating to the draft.
Since apparently I wasn't audible enough, I'd move receipt of the report with the inclusion of comments made by members today.
Want to give me a date? You don't want a date in April?
With you? I don't date men.
And I don't.
No, I'd rather leave it up to the process.
Leave it up, okay.
And my second.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
Any comment on the motion and second? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you, it's unanimous. I think we are done.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.